Today. We are in a series called 10 for 10. It's sort of based off of ESPN's 30 for 30 series. 10 topics that are near and dear to Blake, John, and I's heart. And before we start, just a couple of quick announcements. One of the things that we forgot to mention, next week during our 9:30 service, during our Connect groups, you guys know Gideon Burnham. He went on a missions trip to Brazil. And so all of the Connect groups will be together next Sunday at 9:30, and Gideon will be speaking about that trip. The other announcement that I again want to hit is today's sermon and subject matter is a little bit more intense. And so if you've got a small child and you're nervous, right back there in the library, my wife is there with the movie. And so if you'd like to send your kids that way, we've got that option for you. Today, this sermon is incredibly personal to me, my life, my testimony. Credit where credit is due. People that helped me with this message gave me ideas. Matt Proctor, Steve Arterburn, Fred Stoker, Mike Yorkie, all contributed, and I just want to thank them. Let's go ahead and pray. I thank you so much just for being alive. God, I pray that today you would move me out of the way and that your message would be spoken loud and clear. We love you so much, God. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. There's an elephant in the room. There's an elephant. I'm not talking about leftover VBS decorations. I'm not talking about a stuffed animal. I'm talking about an issue. There's an elephant in the room. It's one of those weird English phrases we have. When you say there's an elephant in the room, you are saying that there's a big issue that everyone is aware of, but it's being ignored. Because everyone kind of finds discussion about it. You have a child. Let's say you have a child that's in college and he comes home from Thanksgiving and he has a tattoo sleeve. That would be an example of an elephant in the room. Or your dad that you grew up with, knowing your entire life, decides to get his ears pierced. That would be an elephant in the room. Let me illustrate this further. A topic that everyone knows about, but it's being ignored because it's uncomfortable. John's up to bat preaching one Sunday, and it comes to his sermon, and you're waiting for John to come up. You're waiting in anticipation, and then finally walks up John with this haircut. Let's jump to this next slide. He has this haircut, okay? I want you to imagine this. He doesn't mention anything about it in the sermon. What are you all focused on the entire time? The haircut, but no one's talking about it. Let's illustrate this further. You walk through the church one Sunday morning and Blake is there to shake your hand and he's wearing this. He doesn't say anything, so you don't say anything, but what are you noticing? His outfit. Everyone notices it. No one's talking about it. Because that's what's easiest. When there's an elephant in the room, we don't like confrontation. We don't like comfort. We like what's easiest. We like not talking. And you know who else likes us not talking? The enemy. The Bible talks about the enemy. Satan, he would tear us down, keep us isolated, keep us quiet. There's an elephant in our churches today, and we are not talking about it. We're not talking about it. And so today, our sermon will be tackling the subject of lust and pornography. So buckle in. It's going to get awkward. Every once in a while, I see when this topic is brought up, there is resistance. There's a place for a topic like that. I don't struggle with that. Therefore, I can't imagine other people struggling with it. Alex, that's inappropriate. It's awkward. Maybe you can convince statistics your way. Let's first look at the world, and then let's look at the church. Let's look at the world. Sex is the number one thing that people search for on the internet. The number one thing. 40% of internet users view pornography. The average age of first introduction is 8 years old. 8. And that tends to get a reaction out of people, but we really shouldn't be shocked. We hand our kids all these devices at such a young age, that statistic isn't going to change. And estimated that 90% of young men under the age of 18 see porn, almost 60% of women got youth groups. 90% of men, 60% of women. But, maybe the church is better, right? Maybe we've got it figured out. Unfortunately, the statistics aren't that much different. 60% of all Christian men and 30% of all Christian women are addicted to pornography. 60% of men, 30% of women. This was a poll done through ChristianNet. 60% of the women who answered the survey admitted to having significant struggles with lust. Because again, guys, today's sermon, it isn't a problem with just guys, it's everyone. 40% of the women admitted to being involved in sexual sin in the past year. These aren't numbers. It's people. It's husbands, it's fathers, it's mothers, it's wives, it's your children, it's your son, it's your daughter, families, friends, coworkers. It's the body of Christ, and it's an elephant. 60% of men in this room and 30% of women. I talk more on a weekly basis about this issue than any other issue with guys. And without fail, the phrase I always hear more often than not is, I don't know how I got here. I don't know how I got here. And today that's what I want to unpack. What is the process of lust? What are the warning signs that we need to look for? How do we nip the problem in the bud? If you guys have your Bibles, open up to 2 Samuel 11. That's where we're going to be today. 2 Samuel 11. While you guys turn there, I want to read you another passage from the New Testament. You guys turn to 2 Samuel 11. I have a picture of us right up here. This is us. That's me in the red. Behind me. My brother just made the cheerleading squad for Missouri State, so we've been celebrating that this weekend. He's my younger brother, and just like that, you know that your boys may struggle with hitting, punching, spitting, biting, kicking, overall just touching each other. It's a problem. And this is especially true in the car. My brother and I loved to fight in the car. Every long trip was like a WWE special. Like we were just duking it out, okay? And there would be times where my parents would just be fed up with us. And they would stop touching each other. Stop touching each other. And being this smart weasel that I was, I put my fingers as close to my brother and say, I'm not, there it is, too. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And the Old Testament says, don't commit adultery. That's what the Old Testament says. Don't commit adultery. And I imagine a lot of people treat that command like I did in the car. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not committing adultery, but I'll get as close as I can. I'll make jokes. I'll imagine. I'll look. I'll linger, but I'm still not doing it. But look at what Jesus says in Matthew 5:28. You've heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery, but I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus expands the command, and he gets to the root of the issue. Lust isn't just an external action, it's also an internal heart problem. And what that means is that this is actually a lot harder of a problem to solve. So if you're struggling with this is one of the reasons why it's such a struggle. It's because you are dealing with a heart issue. And so, okay, yeah, maybe today you don't struggle with porn, but you may struggle with dreaming. Instead of focusing on your husband or your kids, you dream about that coworker or friend. Man, what would life be like just one night with them? Or maybe you're driving and you see that woman jogging on the side of the road and you linger with your eyes and your thoughts just a little too long. Some of you are high school students in the room. It may look like an innocent flirting with another student, but on the inside, your sinful heart is screaming for more. We're not just talking about porn today. We're talking about lust, and I feel like that's an issue a lot of us can relate to. So where does this process begin? And how do we know if we are on the slippery slope of lust, and how do we stop? What do we do to prevent it? I had you guys turn to 2 Samuel 11. Open it up. Let's look at verse 1. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, this king, King David, stayed behind in Jerusalem. So what do we know about David? Maybe you've heard that Sunday school story before. David fighting who? Goliath. Yeah. You know, little David fighting Goliath. Well, that's long gone now. When you think of David, I want you to think of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Okay, I'm going to explain this. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Okay, some of you know Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as a wrestler, okay? He used to be a wrestler. Some of you don't know this. He was. David was the definition of a man's man. Dwayne is known as this WWE fighter, ripped. Well, David, this king, was known as a mighty warrior. He had mighty men by his side. He conquered foes. He defeated enemies. He established Israel as a world power through his military might and diplomacy. You know, Dwayne's a WWE fighter. But a lot of you know Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as an actor. Well, David was a poet. David wrote songs, mostly about God and his relationship with him. The most important thing you need to know about David is that he was known as a man after God's own heart. He was known as a great guy, a faithful follower of God. This is David. Now let's add on the first part of verse 2. Look at it. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. Okay, so Jerusalem's on a hill. David's palace would have been the highest place in town, and then he's on the roof. Okay, so David is literally at the highest point, and I feel like the author is telling us this on purpose, because not only is David physically on top of the world, he is emotionally, spiritually, he is on top. But what we're about to see is David hit the lowest point in his entire life. What's going on here? There's some details I want you to see, and I highlighted them in yellow. During the time when kings normally go out to war, this king stayed at home. Why? And I've read a bunch of different theories and commentaries and that kind of thing. One of them, some people think David was getting old. He was probably around his 50s, and maybe his body just didn't work like it used to. David, you're just not moving as fast as you used to. You might want to stay home, old man. Maybe that's the case. Maybe David was lazy. It says he's taking a nap in the afternoon. Maybe he just didn't want to go. I'm going to call in sick to work today. I don't want to go. Regardless, David has been left behind. And this army that he's usually in charge of goes out and has success without him. And that gives us a clue towards our first stage into lust. A psychological study was done towards emotions that contribute to destructive behavior. We talk about this a lot at Life Right. And through the results, they came up with the acronym HALT. HALT. Some of you have heard this before. Each letter represents an emotion that makes you more susceptible to doing something not smart. The H stands for hungry, the A stands for angry, the L stands for lonely, and the T stands for tired. When you are experiencing one of those emotions, you are more likely to do something that you normally wouldn't do. You're more likely to fall into a trap. So what was David feeling? Well, we don't really know if he was tired or hungry, but if I had to bet, he was probably lonely. He might have been angry. A man that prides himself in being this mighty warrior left at home. The first step into falling into lust is emotion. It's emotion. Maybe you're angry at your wife for not meeting your needs. Maybe you're lying in bed at night and there's no one to share it with, and you just feel lonely. Maybe you're up late and you're tired, but you can't seem to fall asleep, so you're on your computer while the rest of your family is asleep. Maybe you're frustrated at your husband for how he's been treating you. Maybe you feel down because unlike all of your friends, you can't seem to find a boyfriend or girlfriend. You feel these emotions, and that's our first step. It's a feeling. I have a group of guys here at the church, and we keep each other accountable through all this. And I introduced the HALT acronym, and we use it all the time when we communicate. It's really cool. When they text me, I was tired and I messed up. I was tired. I was angry and tempted, but I called a friend. I've been feeling really lonely, guys. I need help. The first step is emotion, but let's keep reading. The second half of verse 2, it says, as he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. We're going to see later on in the story that, this woman wasn't a clean freak. It was customary in Jewish time that once a woman had her period, the law of Moses required her to wash herself, to return to sort of a state of spiritual readiness to create life. So she wasn't some seductress wooing the king. No, she was a faithful follower of God doing what she was supposed to do. And this is where we see our second stage of falling into lust. It starts with emotion, but then it turns into a look. A look. And this can manifest itself in a bunch of ways. It may be an advertisement on a website you visit. It may be a photo that someone posts on Facebook. It may be a quick glance at a coworker, a person as you drive by. David is scanning the city, and he looks. Growing up in my house, we had this thing called the 5-second rule. How many of you are familiar with this? 5-second rule. What is the 5-second rule? Jesse, what is the 5-second rule? Calling you out. Yeah, what is it? Oh, okay, so that's what we're applying, but with food, the 5-second rule. You're jumping ahead of my notes, man. You're good. That's awesome. The 5-second rule. When you drop a piece of food, you have 5 seconds. Unless you're from Osakis, and then it's 5 minutes. You guys are hillbillies out there. I'm just kidding. I live there. So the point was, if you wanted to save the food, it's important to act fast. You don't have much time. It's important to note that in our stages of lust, stages 1 and 2, emotions and looks, those aren't necessarily bad things. You will have moments where you have negative emotions. You will accidentally run into something you shouldn't see. You know, a catalog you get in the mail, a show as you're flipping channels, a photo on Facebook, a story on Snapchat. This is going to happen just because we live in a fallen world. But what you need to see, it's what you do next that is critical. Unfortunately, David falls into a trap many of us do. Let's keep reading. He sent someone to find out who she was and was told she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. I imagine that whoever David sent probably emphasized those last words. Oh, you know David, the married woman, the one not interested, the one whose relationship status on Facebook says happily. They didn't have Facebook, but let's just pretend they did. David did what a lot of us fall into. It starts with an emotion. It turns into a look, and then it turns into lingering. And this is where sin enters the picture. When you make the conscious choice to stay, just like Jesse, you were talking about, in the book Every Man's Battle, they talk about a concept called bouncing the eyes. When you see something you shouldn't see, you just like the 5-second rule, you've got to get out of there and quickly bounce your eyes off of it. I heard a great quote from a sermon that said this: hesitation turns into contemplation. You hesitate, and then you begin contemplating it. Contemplating it turns into negotiation. You try justifying yourself. Negotiation turns into participation. And then participation turns into devastation. So do not hesitate. David acted upon the look. David clicked the website. David stayed on the channel. David flipped through the magazine. David inquired about Bathsheba when he wasn't supposed to. And based on Jesus' command in Matthew, David's sinning here. He's lusting after her in his heart. He inquires about this married woman, but look at what he does next. Then David sent messengers to get her. And when she came to the palace, he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after a menstrual period, just like we talked about, and then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent David a message saying, hey, king, I'm pregnant. Let's not throw David off the hook here. David was the king. If Bathsheba refused, she might have been killed. David abused his power for sinful pleasure, this man after God's own heart. He forced her into this. It moved from lingering into action. Emotion, look, lingering, action. Why am I talking about this today? I was talking with some friends last night, and they shared that they have a family member that's a little bit older than me, and their first introduction was 7th grade. I'm a little bit younger. My first introduction was 4th grade. You guys see it dropping, okay? When I was in 4th grade, I had a buddy tell me to look up a video online, and that was the first time I ever saw something I shouldn't have seen. I immediately told my parents. I immediately did. And I confessed, and I cried, and we worked it out. But my heart was hooked. And at first, it was every couple of months. And then it turned into every couple of weeks. And then it turned into an every single day thing. And I need you to know, this is what I thought, especially around this junior high time. I thought that I had it all under control. This is just a me problem. It's only me that knows about it. It's not affecting all the other areas of my life. I'm fine. I've got it under control. No one knows about it. We're all good. I thought that was the case until I went to high school and I started dating. And I'd already built up this consistent pattern of just pursuing pleasure and neglecting women. And I started dating, and I was known as a really big person in my youth group that did a lot of Jesus things. But as I went on in high school, I developed this new reputation. The one who dates a lot of women and leaves them high and dry. I thought it was just going to be porn. I thought it was just lingering. And then what I saw was that it started to bleed into all these other areas of my life. This sin was just getting worse and worse. David was just looking at her, but now look at what's happening. He's got a pregnant married woman at his hands. Some of you need to hear this today. You're playing with fire. You think you're safe just keeping your sin inside. No one knows about it. It's just a thought. It's just a dream. It's just something I do alone that no one knows about. There's this TV show called Fatal Attractions. It's a show about people that keep exotic pets. There's an episode where this guy is showing off his pet tiger in a cage, and he brings the camera guy over, and then the tiger just starts tearing into the owner's arm. And then the next shot is the guy all bandaged up. It's kind of funny. It shouldn't be, but he's all bandaged up, and he looks at the camera. He's like, I don't know what happened. And I'm like, yes, you do. You own a tiger, dummy. Like, you're housing a dangerous animal. What are you doing? Some of you are keeping tigers in your heart and you think you're safe. You think that it's just a small thing I'm doing. I can promise you from experience, it will not stay a small thing if you keep living in it. Small sin decisions turn into big sin decisions because what David does next is shocking. He's got a problem. What are we going to do with the husband? We got a pregnant wife here. What are we going to do with the husband? So he goes with plan A. Plan A was he brings Uriah home from war and says, hey, go spend the night with your wife. And so Uriah goes, but he doesn't do it. Why? Because Uriah is a soldier. And when his brothers are out at war, he's not going to take a part in these pleasures. He doesn't do it. Plan A didn't work. So David goes to plan B. I'm going to get Uriah really, really drunk, and then I'll send him home. But again, Uriah refuses to go home with his wife. The sad irony, Uriah is a better man drunk than David is sober. It's sad. And then David goes to plan C. Verse 14. The next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab, station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest. Then pull back so that he will be killed. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy's soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed, along with several Israelite soldiers. There's our last step. Emotions turn into looks. Looks turn into lingering. Lingering turns into actions. And actions turn into big actions. We've talked about this before. If we asked David on the roof if he could imagine sleeping with another man's wife and committing murder, he would have said, you're crazy. And if I talked to some of you and brought up your worst sins to you as a child, you would think that I'm crazy. When we make the decision to live in sin, it snowballs. When we live in sin, it just grows worse and worse and worse, and we find ourselves living a completely different life than we thought we would ever live. I want to go back to the statistics. These statistics are telling me that there are a lot of Davids in this room. Just like me, a lot of decisions being made in this room in secrecy. Is there any hope to defeating this elephant? Is there anything positive we can take away from this sermon? There are some details in the story that give us a clue on how to defeat lust and pornography. David thinks he has his sin covered up. Uriah is dead. He takes Bathsheba as his wife. I imagine he's doing this. We're all good. But what we see in the next chapter is that nothing is ever done in secret. God sees everything. And God put a man named Nathan, a prophet, up to the task to go confront David. So you see in this next chapter, Nathan confront David, a messenger of God. God instructs Nathan to go confront him. And he calls David out for the selfish, sinful act he has done. David could have killed him. David could have shrugged off his words. David could have ignored him. But he didn't. Instead, David listened. And here's what I want you to see out of this. David had friends in his life that cared more about his holiness than his happiness. David had friends in his life that cared more about his holiness than his happiness. John brought something up when he listened to this sermon on Thursday. Joab, this guy that we keep hearing, was David's cousin. Joab delivered the message to go kill Uriah. Joab knew what was going on the entire time, and yet Joab didn't call David out. Nathan did. Some of you are filling your lives with Joabs. You've got a bunch of Joab friends. Friends that we just want to go have fun. We just want to go do whatever. It's all about fun. It's all about pleasure. They are destroying your life. Do you have friends that actually care about you? That have courage to call you out when you're doing something silly? David had a friend that kept him accountable. Friends that were willing to stick out their necks and be honest even when it was hard. I would say the pit of my life was my senior year of high school when I just kept diving more and more into sin. What was the answer? For me, the answer was going to college and finding a friend named Brandon. Brandon and I both opened up that we struggled with the same thing, and Brandon and I made the decision we are going to keep each other accountable, not just with lust, but in everything. We still call each other every week. He is the meanest person to me. He says some of the worst things, and I'm so thankful for it. We make each other better because I had someone keeping me accountable. Satan wants to keep your sin in the dark. He wants you to fight this fight alone. Notice when David sinned on the roof, he was by himself. He didn't have someone smacking him saying, "Stop that. She's married." We talk about this at Life Right all the time. One of the best things if you're battling a sin or addiction is bring it to the light with friends. It's hard, it's scary, but it's the best thing you can do. Do you have accountability partners? Do you have a Nathan in your life? Are you man enough to not let this sin rule you anymore and have friends that can fight alongside you? Are you willing to listen when friends call you out? Even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. I thought that was pretty funny. Lone Rangers are dead Rangers. Don't fight alone. In all of your bulletins, you'll see every single staff member's number. Blake's number, John's number, my number, Sue's number. Maybe what you need to do this week is you just need to text someone. Say, "Hey, I've been struggling with this. I can promise you that we won't leave you. I can promise you that we'll listen and we will work with you through this." Find accountability. Here's the last thing I want you to see. As I said earlier, David was a poet. And your homework this week that I would love for you to do is everyone go home and read Psalm 51. Psalm 51, it's a psalm that David wrote right after sinning and getting confronted by Nathan. And in Psalm 51, what David essentially says is, "God, I've messed up. God, I've screwed up, but I'm going to turn around and I'm going to chase after you." And so what does that tell us? Instead of chasing after sin, David turned around and chased after God. You guys think the answer is just trying harder? Setting up more barriers if you just move your mind somewhere else? Understand that you do have to steer your mind towards something else, but it's someone else. Instead of focusing on the momentary high of lust, set your mind on the all-surpassing love of Jesus. The more you dive into that never-ending well of his love, the more you'll hate the cheap momentary high of lust. Come to church. Join a small group. Dive into your Bibles. Do devotions with your family. Chase after God with all of your heart. Don't fight alone. Lean on someone to keep you accountable. I want to say one last thing, and then I want to give you a story, and then we'll be good to go. Understand that Jesus, God in flesh, came through the lineage of David. After David died, he was known as a man after God's own heart. After David died, here's what I want you to see. David wasn't known as a screw-up. He wasn't known as a failure. God still loved him, showed him grace, and forgave him. His bad moments didn't define him, and your bad moments don't have to define you. Man, one of the biggest lies that Satan threw at me as I battled this was, God can't love a person like you. There's no way God can love such a messy, ugly screw-up like you. Guys, that is not true. Your bad moments don't have to define you. There's always the opportunity to repent, turn around, change the direction of your life. I want to conclude with a story as our prayer today, and then once I finish the story, you guys will be dismissed. There was once a great and noble king whose land was terrorized by a crafty dragon. Like a massive bird of prey, this scaly beast delighted in ravaging villages with his fiery breath. Hapless victims ran from their burning homes, only to be snatched into the dragon's jaws or talons. Those devoured instantly were deemed more fortunate than those carried back to the dragon's lair to be devoured at his leisure. The king led his sons and knights in many valiant battles against the dragon. Riding alone in the forest, one of the king's sons heard his name purred low and soft. In the shadow of the ferns and trees, curled among the boulders, lay a dragon. The creature's heavy-lidded eyes fastened on the prince, and the reptilian mouth stretched into a friendly smile. "Don't be alarmed," said the dragon, as gray wisp of smoke rose lazily from his nostrils. "I am not what your father thinks." "Well, what are you then?" asked the prince, warily drawing his sword as he pulled the reins to keep his fearful horse from bolting. "I am pleasure," said the dragon. "Ride on my back, and you will experience more than you ever imagined. Come now, I have no harmful intentions. I seek a friend, someone to share flights with me. Have you never dreamed of flying, never longed to soar in the clouds?" Visions of soaring high above the forested hills drew the prince hesitantly from his horse. The dragon unfurled one great webbed wing to serve as a ramp to his rigid back. Between the spiny projections, the prince found a secure seat, and then the creature snapped his powerful wings twice and launched them into the sky. The prince's apprehension just melted into awe and exhilaration, and from then on, he met the dragon often, but secretly, for how could he tell his father, brothers, or the knights that he had befriended the enemy? The prince felt separate from them all. Their concerns were no longer his concerns. Even when he wasn't with the dragon, he spent less time with those he loved and more time alone. The skin on the prince's legs became callous from gripping the rigid back of the dragon, and his hands grew rough and hardened. He began wearing gloves to hide the marks. After many nights of riding, he discovered scales growing on the back of his hands as well. With dread, he realized his fate if he were to continue, so he resolved to return no more to the dragon. But after a fortnight, he again sought out the dragon, having been tormented with desire. And so it transpired many times over. No matter what his determination, the prince eventually found himself pulled back, as if by the cords of an invisible web. Silently, patiently, the dragon always waited. Well, one cold moonless night, their excursion became a foray against the sleeping village. They torched the thatched roofs with fiery blasts from his nostrils. The dragon roared with delight when the terrified victims fled from their burning homes. Swooping in, the serpent belched again, and flames engulfed a cluster of screaming villages. The prince closed his eyes tightly in an attempt to shut out the carnage. In the pre-dawn hours, when the prince crept back from his dragon ride, the road outside his father's castle usually was empty. But he noticed, I lost my place. Terrified refugees streamed into the protective walls of the castle. The prince attempted to slip through the crowd to close himself in his chambers, but some of the survivors stared and pointed towards him. "He was there," one woman cried out. "I saw him on the back of the dragon." Others nodded their head in angry agreement. Horrified, the prince saw that his father, the king, was in the courtyard, holding a bleeding child in his arms. The king's face mirrored the agony of his people as his eyes found the prince's. The son fled, hoping to escape in the night, but the guards apprehended him as if he were a common thief. They brought him to the great hall where his father sat solemnly on the throne. The people on every side railed against the prince. "Banish him!" he heard one of his own brothers angrily cry out. "Burn him alive!" As the king rose from his throne, bloodstains from the wounded shone darkly on his royal robes. The crowd fell silent in expectation of the decree. The prince, who could not bear to look into his father's face, stared at the flagstones of the floor. "Take your gloves off and your tunic," the king commanded. The prince obeyed slowly, dreading to have his metamorphosis uncovered before the kingdom. Was his shame not already enough? He had hoped for a quick death without further humiliation, and sounds of revulsions rippled through the crowd at the sight of the prince's thick, scaled skin and the ridge growing along his spine. The king strode towards his son, and the prince steeled himself, fully expecting a backhanded blow, even though he had never been struck by his father. Instead, his father embraced him and wept as he held him tightly. In shocked disbelief, the prince buried his face against his father's shoulders, and the king whispered in his ears, "Do you wish to be freed from the dragon, my son?" And the prince answered in despair, I've wished it so many times, but there's no hope for me. Not alone, said the king. You cannot win against the dragon alone. Father, I'm no longer your son. I'm half beast, sobbed the prince. But his father replied, my blood runs in your veins. My nobility has always been stamped deep within your soul. And with his face still hidden tearfully in his father's embrace, the prince heard the king instruct the crowd, the dragon is crafty. Some fall victim to his wiles and some to his violence. There will be mercy for all who wish to be freed. Who else among you has ridden the dragon? The prince lifted his head to see someone emerge from the crowd. To his amazement, he recognized an older brother, one who had been lauded throughout the kingdom for his onslaughts against the dragon in battle and for his many good deeds. Others came, some weeping, others hanging their heads in shame. The king embraced them all. You are dismissed.